Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I am feeling a lot better than I did in the last video. I was in the middle of not only a flare with all the weather, and we have more weather coming in, but I also was in the middle of a migraine stretch that I hadn't fully acknowledged at that point because I don't like taking my PRN migraine medication unless I absolutely have to. So, um, all that combined together to make for what probably looked like a pretty miserable video because I was pretty miserable. But before I get started, I believe it was Ariane from Book Zealots had asked a question about the hood I was wearing. And it's a knit hood. It's actually a free pattern. It's called Thorn's Hooded Cowl. I know, Ariane, you say that you crochet, I think, not primarily, I think you say you only crochet. I'm pretty sure that there's got to be an equivalent to the hood out there. I also crochet, but I tend to gravitate towards knitting, even though I was a crocheter first, and I actually design crochet patterns. But so it's a knit pattern. It's called Thorn's Hooded Cowl. I did not design it. And yeah, it's free out there on the internet. You just type in Thorn, and that's Thorn like as in the Hobbit Thorin. And it was part of a website that had like all these free knit, maybe even crochet as well, patterns based off of Tolkien's works. So yes, and actually that ties that right back into booktube. But they have several different options to personalize the hood, either have a wider hood or a longer or whatever based off of your preference. So yes, that hopefully answers questions about that hood. I use it to block light as well as for warmth, just because those edges there help with peripheral vision, light coming in with the migraines and light sensitivity. So I have like 3 or 4 different colors. But anyway, now that I've done that intro part, I do realize I have people's comments to answer from the last video, and I will be getting to that. I just figured while I had some energy, especially with all the weather coming in, I better push out another video while I have something of a brain present, especially since I'm doing my knitting podcast or a knitting channels video tomorrow. So want to get this in before I'm completely wiped out. Anyway, hopefully this will be the last week that I have to deal with these glasses that keep sliding off, because my new ones should be coming in. My ones that actually aren't too wide should be coming in. I keep saying I'm going to get started, really going to get started now. Just want to go over some of the books that I finished last month. It's been a bit of slow going getting reading done. I feel like this year, but particularly the past few months. That being said, I did manage to finish, I think it ended up being a total of 3 books, because I ended up DNFing the one that was in the Pride of a Moment. I talked about that in a previous video. The first book that I wanted to cover, just in brief, is what Jane Austen characters read and why. And I did enjoy this book. I didn't necessarily agree with all of the points of view that the author had, but I did enjoy, first of all, the conversation about Austen and what she read, about reading aloud, about just the general reading culture of the time period. And then I enjoyed where the author touched on the different styles of literature that maybe each book could be said to focus on, like Gothic for Northanger Abbey. That one's pretty obvious. Then she mentioned the romantic writing style, so romanticism, which is almost like a different twist on the Gothic. Then the author mentioned the like the lecture is not the right term. They're called the basically self-improvement books, like the ones that Mr. Collins tried to read to the Bennett sisters, like Forsyths, those kind of books, as being like a building ground for Pride and Prejudice. Then, what did they say for Mansfield Park? Mansfield Park had a lot more of a wider range of things. I don't remember what the author pointed at specifically, but there seemed to be a lot of focus on plays. Like you talked about Hamlet, you talked about Lover's Vows, but they also covered travel literature. There was more of diverse, but those are probably the two things I could think of specifically. Emma, there was actually a fair lack of reading. There was a lot of making of lists of things to read. But what reading there was brought up, although I can't remember what the theme was, if she was able to come with any specific theme of book style for Emma. And Persuasion really goes deeper into the idea of poetry versus prose. She also brought in some ideas like the Byronic hero, just a certain kind of hero that certain literature brought out and how that was represented within the work of Persuasion. So it was an interesting book that made me think about Austen's work in a different way, and I have noticed its influence as I've been reading, as I finished Northanger Abbey, and then as I started reading the annotated Sense and Sensibility. I start thinking about the themes a little bit more. Sorry, I'm having to reposition. My knees bother me with the weather, especially the one I dislocated last year. But, so I find myself noticing the themes more because of this book, even if I didn't necessarily always agree to the points that were made in the book. See, I would recommend this as a read. I kind of wish that I had, sorry, I keep kicking, I'm trying to put my leg up, and I keep kicking a different chair. There we go. But I would definitely recommend the book. It makes you think about Austen's work in another way. I wish I had picked up a physical version instead of having the Kindle version, and maybe at some point I will pick up the physical version so that way I can annotate it. I really need to reallocate where I have my yarn so I can free up more book space in my shelves, because yarn is taking up valuable book space. So just had to move things around because I keep picking up physical books. First of all, because of the kind of books I enjoy reading aren't always available at a decent price on Kindle, if at all on Kindle. Or I sometimes just want a specific physical book to annotate in. So, anyway. Yes, I would recommend this book. I can see myself rereading, especially if I have it in physical form. I can see myself rereading and annotating it. So, once again, that is called What Jane Austen's Characters Read and Why. I don't actually have the author's name here, I don't think. Oh, yes, I do. Susan Allen Ford. So, yes, and that was a Kindle book, so I don't have it physically here to show. This was some of the notes I had decided to take. Now, after a while, I got tired of writing all the notes down. Something I wouldn't have had a problem with if I was annotating was it was difficult enough to get my Kindle Fire to conveniently type things in. Not Kindle Fire, my Paperwhite, to type things into the notes, because Paperwhite really doesn't have the most convenient annotation system, I feel. So, just having to type it there took forever, and then to try to go back and then write it in notes, it took way too much time. It took away from the reading experience because it just took double the time to type it in there and write it in here. And unless I wanted to stop every 5 seconds and write in a notepad, it's just... So yeah, I think I'll end up picking this book up physical so I can get more out of it the next time I read it. Then the other book I finished for Jane Austen in July was my rereading of Northanger Abbey. Now, I did end up taking something from the last video that I saw for Book Zealots. Erin, you looked like you were writing your notes on an index note, and I don't know if this is the way you do it or not, but what I ended up going through is taking a look at what I had annotated in my copy of Northanger Abbey, and I just then wrote some quick highlights of what I had annotated. Because what always happens to me is I'll have all these things I want to say about a book, and I'll write in the margins or whatever, and then I'll forget what it was I wanted to say about the book, and then I'm umming and ahhing, and just I can't pull my thoughts together. So hopefully this will be something that works better for me. I did have fun using some of my annotation stuff. I've been watching videos on annotation just to get some ideas. So I was using, because I didn't want to mark up this particular copy of Northanger Abbey. This comes from a box set, and I didn't really want to mess it up. So I was using, sticky highlighter tape, as well as, see-through highlighter, or see-through sticky notes in order to write notes on. So in some points, if I wanted to make note of a certain area, I'd just have like random see-through heart sticky notes in there just to make a point in that area. I don't know. It was fun to just kind of make certain areas more entertaining and pretty just in the way they looked, as well as using it to take actual notes. And then if I ever want to, I can just take those notes out. Like in my other copies from this set might not have any annotation in them at all, because I now have my annotated Jane Austen set. So those will probably be where I write my annotations, and my other copies in this collection will probably stay clean. I won't end up removing my annotation tabs and sticky notes from this just because I like them in here, and they're a moment in time. So I'll just keep them in here. They don't do any harm. But the others in the collection probably won't get the same annotation treatment. But this is a reread. I've read this at least a time or two before. Northanger Abbey I haven't read nearly as much as some of the other ones in the series, or any of Austen's other works. For whatever reason, this was a later find for me. So I've read it quite a bit less than her other works. But this is my first time annotating any of Austen's works while reading. I didn't have much to comment on stylistically other than to kind of highlight a turn of phrase that I particularly enjoyed or something like that, because I do love a good turn of phrase. But most of my annotations that had any sort of actual thought process besides, ooh, I like this, had to do with noticing foreshadowing or previously unnoticed character, just watching the character development and the foreshadowing. It was annotating just helped me think more deeply while I was reading. things that I had always noticed. Like, I mean, anyone who reads this, spoiler alert, by the way, if you haven't read Northanger Abbey, I'll give you a couple seconds to skedaddle and then I'll continue. But presuming that you have escaped or paused or skipped forward or whatever, slight spoilers, well, okay, maybe more than slight spoilers for Northanger Abbey. I had always known how two-faced Isabella was, of course, because that's, anyone who reads Northanger Abbey is going to realize that. But because I was reading more thoughtfully and annotating as I went along, I found myself catching things that pointed to this that I hadn't caught before. Things like on page 29. Let's see. 18. 26. There we go. Okay, so where she's talking to Catherine about, doing her typical thing about scolding men and how, her attachments to her female friends are just uncommonly strong, and she always puts them before these men, and she told Captain Hunt at one of her last assemblies this winter that if he was to tease me all night, I would not dance with him unless he would allow Miss Andrews to be as beautiful as an angel. That men think that we are incapable the men think that we are incapable of real friendship, and I am determined to show them the difference. Now, if I were to hear someone speak slightingly of you, I should fire up in a moment, but that is not at all likely, for you are just the kind of girl to be a great favorite with all the men. And then she goes on actually to speak of Miss Andrews slightingly. Oh, I know you very well. You have so much animation, which is exactly what Miss Andrew wants, for I must confess that there is something amazingly insipid about her. And it's just so funny because it's something I didn't catch previously in my reading because it's kind of flies under the radar with all of her more obvious things where she contradicts herself later. It's, on the one hand, she's like, well, I don't allow anyone to speak slightingly of my friends. And then she goes and turns around and, speaks slightingly of her friend. In less than, it's like in 3 sentences. Just shows all of her grand statements about basically anything can't be trusted. Because she does this all the time. She'll make a grand statement and then do, the exact opposite. So, then, let's see what else. The other thing that I noticed, 110 and 111, was how not only Catherine is incredibly influenced by the Gothic novel, but Isabella is too. And it kind of helped to a certain extent. Yes, Isabella is greedy and she's a coquette and just absolutely untrustworthy in every way, but it, to a certain extent, added a little bit of a human aspect to her that kind of gave her something in common with Catherine that wasn't just artifice, where she actually is as into these novels as Catherine. And if you look at her conversation on page 110 and 111, you can see how some of her statements, or at least the way I saw some of her statements, some of her effusive gushing, and might not only be a part of her shallowness, but might also be her being caught up in the Gothic idea of romance. And that she kind of casts herself in this idea of the Gothic heroine in a way that Catherine does later, but Catherine does it in a much more innocent way, whereas Isabella, there's always a level of artifice and self-serving in her, even in her play. Yeah, I'm trying to find exactly. It's the feeling of these 2 pages. If you read over it, like I said, I kind of It's the over-the-top language that has that Gothic feel, and just this overly romanticness as well. So yeah, I'm just wondering if anyone else picked up on Isabella's not just using the Gothic as a way to connect with Catherine, but actually being kind of swept away in it herself. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who picked up on that. And I find that this novel is as much about what isn't said as what is said, that if you read between the lines, you can see the character's true self in spite of their artifice. So Catherine and James are pretty straightforward. There's not a lot in between the lines for them. They pretty much say what they're thinking, and they're not very good at doing otherwise. Even when Catherine's harboring her suspicions about General Tilney, he's not particularly good at hiding things. And she feels shame really quickly for when her suppositions are revealed. She not only feels shame, but she also amends to do better. But she and James are pretty straightforward and struggle to understand how other people can be disingenuous and manipulative. Whereas you look at people like Isabella and John Thorpe, and you pretty much can say, okay, what are they saying? It's probably the opposite. Whatever they're saying, the truth probably is exactly opposite of that. And another thing that I noticed when just looking at pages 37, 135, 165, 178, throughout these pages, I just started noticing actually similarities between John Thorpe and General Tilney. It's almost like they're each other's reflections. They're very similar to each other, just that General Tilney knows how to dress it up prettier. And he also has the money to kind of make it more excusable to others. Both of them, Catherine is really only seen as an asset, as a path toward her imagined fortune that only exists in their mind. And once she is no longer seen as that asset, she's tossed away. Or for John Thorpe, it's like once she no longer is potentially attached to him, then he can no longer brush her with the fairy dust that he had in his way of like trying to bring up everyone who's attached with him as a way to brag. And for General Tilney, once he believes that she no longer has what he thinks that she has, he tosses her away because she's no longer useful as well. But I also thought it was interesting on page, I think it's 37, when not long after you meet John Thorpe, it's the first time I sat there and really thought about the whole exchange where he talks about how he picked up the carriage, and then about how he refused to sell the new actually, is it a carriage or it's a gig? He refused to sell his gig for, even an increased price. And then Catherine's brother's like, well, you forget to add, they wanted you to throw in the horse too. But that whole section on, it's like 637, it made me wonder, okay, is this actually a foreshadowing of some of the things to expect for Thorpe later? Not only the fact that he exaggerates to the point of lying, but that it made me wonder, did his arrogance and vanity make him overvalue and overpay for the gig? And did these same qualities that lead him to rate his horse as being much more valuable and of higher quality than it was? He's just such a puffed up braggart and an overbearing, tiresome one at that, but it also would fit in line with what we see later in regards to the Morlands, because Catherine and her brother James are connected to him. James is his friend, and John wants to pursue Catherine because they're in his head connected with him, they have to go up in value. So that definitely matched what he's done previously with this gig and probably with this horse. These things are connected to him, so they must be more valuable. So I think that it might have been I think this was a subtle foreshadowing that I just hadn't really picked up on before. I just thought of it as, oh, it's just John Thorpe being tiresome. Yes, it is John Thorpe just being tiresome and overbearing. But it does fit very well in later when it's brought to everyone's attention. The whole reason why General Tilney thought Catherine was an heiress was because Thorpe talked her value up, just like he talks up the value of this horse. So, yeah, I just thought that was interesting and something I didn't pick up prior to annotating it this time around. But yeah, so if I was to say the theme in this book, it's one where it compares the Gothic novel versus a more realistic form of life, and how where greed and cruelty of the everyday person can be as cruel as the over the top Gothic villain, because what the cruelty that is inflicted on Catherine by the Thorpes, and also James by the Thorpes, and then on Catherine by General Tilney, and even the way General Tilney treats his daughter, actually both of his kids, his younger kids, it's the way that they are treated is unkind. There is a level of cruelty to it. General Thorpe just throw Catherine out without even caring if she had the money to safely get home. If Eleanor hadn't taken care of her, she would not have known that she didn't have money with her because she had been rushed out so quickly. And General Tilney wouldn't have cared. And same thing with John Thorpe. He was very happy to impose his will over Catherine's as long as it got him what he wanted. He was willing to lie to ruin other relationships. Isabella had no issues either when it benefited her. So the more everyday cruelties can still harm much in the way that the Gothic villains. And I thought it was interesting having a juxtaposition against what Catherine imagined a villain to be like versus what the actual villains in her life were that she didn't even recognize. She would romanticize the idea of all these villains in her Gothic novels, but she found the ones that she faced in her daily life to be tiresome or frustrating or any number of things, but not as romantic. I can't remember if it was a movie that I was watching or if it was a book, and the quote goes something to the effect of, it's an adventure when it happens to somebody else. When it happens to you, it's an inconvenience or bothersome. I wish I could remember where the quote came from. It might have been in, I think actually the word was tiresome. It's an adventure when it happens to someone else. When it happens to you, it's just tiresome. And I think it actually came from Gerald Morris's the Song of Dinadan. I believe that is what it was. So I think that's where that quote came from. Not completely sure. But yeah, I very much enjoyed rereading Northanger Abbey in this way. I will enjoy the annotating of Sense and Sensibility within the annotation already in my annotated version. So I was actually going to have a longer video, but I decided to stop this video here and to continue with the rest of my wrap-up in a different video. So thank you very much for joining me for this video, and I will see you for the next one. God bless.